Hey there guys, Portal Master here, and welcome back to another episode of A Brief History of Skylanders. Now, you may notice some type of a time gap between this and the last video that I did in this series. That's because of, for a variety of reasons, the last episode in A Brief History of Skylanders was recorded in October of 2019, and we're now getting to the end of July 2020. So it has been quite some time since I have made videos for this series, so that is the reason for the time jump. Also, you've probably noticed the title of this video, which is A Brief History of Skylanders, Skylanders Trap Team, with the subtitle being The Franchise Killer. This is my own personal opinion, and I wanted to go ahead and get it out of the way that Trap Team is one of my favorite games, but for a variety of reasons, I think that it did several bad things for the franchise overall, and we're going to get into that in this video overall. So thanks so much for clicking on this video. Let's get into this. Skylanders Trap Team was the fourth installment in the mainline Skylanders franchise, and it was released in October of 2014. It was the game that was first exclusively developed by Toys for Bob. Previously, there had been, the first two games were jointly developed by Toys for Bob and Vicarious Visions, and then Swap Force was exclusively developed by Vicarious Visions. So this was the first time that just Toys for Bob would be handling a mainline Skylanders game, which was very exciting, and you can see how their own personal style was reflected in Trap Team, for better or for worse. Some people just prefer Vicarious Visions, some people just prefer Toys for Bob. I think that there are benefits to both of the creators of Skylanders. I think they had very different takes on characters, and for Trap Team you can really see that they are very different from the Swap Force characters overall. So I think that it very clearly shows that Toys for Bob was the sole developer of Trap Team. As many of you guys know, Skylanders Swap Force reinvented the graphical engine for Skylanders. Skylanders Spyro's Adventure and Giants run on effectively the same engine. They look the exact same. Swap Force, of course, renovated this and obviously completely changed the way that Skylanders looked, and Swap Force is still to this day, to a lot of people, the most beautiful Skylanders game overall. See, it's interesting. Trap Team kept the new art style of Swap Force, but actually still swapped the engine. Trap Team and Swap Force do not run on the same engine. I made an entire video about how I thought this was completely idiotic, and it made no sense that they changed the engine overall. And this is a trend that would continue for the remainder of all the Skylanders games. To my knowledge, no other Skylander game past the original two actually ran on the same engine. Swap Force, Trap Team, Superchargers, and Imaginators all used different engines as a product of the fact that development was bouncing back and forth between Toys for Bob and Vicarious Visions every single year. This resulted in a very unique looking game that looked kind of bad on older consoles, but still looked pretty good on the newer consoles. Many of the features that Swap Force added were actually removed in Trap Team. Be it the dual elemental gates were removed, the movement system was removed, and effectively all of the things that were added in Swap Force were really removed in Trap Team. There were a few things like the battle arenas that decided to stick around, but really those were from Giants as well. It had nowhere near the content that Swap Force had overall, and it was also the first game to feature the removal of battle mode, which in my personal opinion marked a very clear point where the franchise started to removing features every single game and calling it a new game that was supposed to be bigger and better. I think that Trap Team is really where this trend started. I don't know why that was, although there are a couple of theories that I have in regards to the development of Trap Team, that it was rushed and that it was, put out way sooner than it really should have been, and as a result, less content was put into the game than the instance of Swap Force, but that's a video for another time. Trap Team did add some features. It was the first game to feature the light and dark elements, which were pretty cool. Light and dark was not introduced before Trap Team was actually announced. The original poster came out for Trap Team and had 2 question marks on it, and four question marks on it for figures actually, and were clearly 2 different elements, and those would later be revealed to be the light and dark elements that we have now come to know and love for the remainder of the three final Skylanders games essentially featured these types of characters, is what I'm trying to say. Skylanders Trap Team was also the first game that didn't really feature any form of technological innovation. Of course, the gimmick within Skylanders Trap Team was the Trap Masters with their Traptanium weapons that wound up being the exact same size as Giants and kind of removed what made the Giants cool in the first place, if we're being perfectly honest with you know, with everything here. But secondly, the other gimmick was, of course, the traps, and I would consider that to be the main gimmick of the Skylanders Trap Team game, and it really didn't add as much as it could have added. Spyro's Adventure was innovative because Toys to Life was a thing. Giants was innovative with Light Core, Swap Force was innovative with the swapping mechanic, that was really cool. While Trap Team did try to go for the whole bringing life to toys thing, I personally think it missed the mark on that because the traps themselves weren't that cool. The coolest thing was probably the Traptanium portal, which is, in my personal opinion, the coolest portal that was ever released, that features the trap slot, the coolest light mechanic on it, and as well it features a speaker, which was something that we didn't see with future Skylander portals, and I think that was probably the coolest thing about the gimmick that was introduced in Trap Team. So what I'm trying to say is overall Trap Team was probably the least innovative title to date at this point in the Skylanders franchise. Skylanders Trap Team had the worst elemental gate system of any game that was ever made. For instance, Spyro's Adventure, you just needed 8 elemental characters and you could get into everything. For, Giants, you needed the same thing, except you also needed 1 giant to play the game, but that was fine because all the starter packs came with a giant. For Swap Force, 8 Swap Force characters were still needed to actually access all of the elemental gates, and it was kind of still a fairly pricey thing, but at least the elemental gates weren't too bad because you could either swap the characters back and forth to get whatever you needed, or you could just play with 2 characters to unlock the dual elemental gates in Swap Force. In Trap Team, however, you needed to buy another 8 brand new Trap Masters that all cost $15, and in fact, you actually needed more than you needed in Swap Force, because in Swap Force there were at least only 8 movement types. In Trap Team, you needed to buy 10 Trap Masters to unlock all of the elemental gates, some of which included the light and the dark elemental gates, which were incredibly hard to find, and as well, you couldn't even open all of the elemental gates on day 1 with Trap Team, at least with, for the magic element. There was no magic element Trap Master released on day 1. Blastermind was a wave, I think, 3 character? Might have been wave 2, but I'm pretty sure he was a wave 3 character, which meant that you had to wait several months just to be able to unlock all of that content that was in the game from day 1. This was a pretty bad system, and is, in my opinion, one of the reasons why the franchise went downhill with Trap Team. Skylanders Trap Team is the most expensive Skylanders game to have ever been made. I'm going to grab my phone and I'm going to read off to you exactly all the figures that were introduced in Skylanders Trap Team. There were 18 new Trap Masters, 18 new cores, 16 minis, 5 reposes, and 56 traps. So all in all, you ended up with 56 traps overall, and 57 total figures. Of course, this doesn't include the adventure pack pieces. We're not counting those. So, let's go ahead and do a quick breakdown on what it cost for this game. So, to unlock all of the content in Skylanders Trap Team, you needed to pay $75 for the Skylanders Trap Team starter pack. You needed to spend $50 for both the Nightmare Express and the Mirror of Mystery, and then you needed to spend another $60 for the Light and the Dark expansion packs. On top of this, you needed to spend $105 on the Trap Masters necessary to open all of the elemental gates, and then you needed to spend $49 on a trap for every element, including the Chaos Trap itself. Overall, to unlock everything in Skylanders Trap Team, every elemental gate, play every level, and trap every villain, you needed to spend $364. The most expensive Skylanders game that was ever made. That is the most money it would ever cost to unlock everything in a Skylanders game. And that is an insane figure. You could buy 6 full-priced games for $364 and still have a few dollars left over. And mind you, that is before tax. With my local tax rate, that would have cost well over $400 for me to have bought every single Skylanders figure just to unlock all of the content in Trap Team. But let's think a second. It gets worse, because if you wanted to get every single figure in Trap Team, if you wanted to buy all the Trap Masters, all the cores, and all the traps, you needed to spend, by my calculation, and this is the cheapest way to get everything, $1,100. $1,100 before tax. Again, mind you, with my local tax rate, you would be spending almost $1,200 to buy every single Skylanders Trap Team figure. and Trap. And that is an insane metric. You could buy, with that price, in today's, economy, you could probably buy a PlayStation 4, an Xbox One X, and a Nintendo Switch for less money than it costs to buy everything in Skylanders Trap Team. There was an insane amount of things released for Trap Team, and honestly, they didn't do very much. Despite the fact that Skylanders Trap Team is still, in my opinion, one of the good games that was made, especially if you played it on the new consoles, there is no denying that the minis were almost a completely unnecessary addition into Trap Team, as well as the way that they did the traps. There was no reason to sell 6 different life traps. The trap system should have been handled differently. And I think that, I'll talk a little bit about, going forward. It was really bad because, in the future games, the traps weren't used for anything. You could have bought all 56 traps for $7 a pop, which would have cost well over $300 at that point for them to do absolutely nothing in the future game. You're telling me you could have spent more money on the traps from Trap Team than a Nintendo Switch, and they did nothing in future games other than maybe unlock a single thing or give you some brownie points. There was no real reason to buy traps going forward. Again, I love Trap Team, but these are some of the fatal flaws that were present with this game. Don't get me started on the Skylanders Trap Team Wii version. This is the game that was released for Skylanders with the absolute worst graphics. Skylanders Trap Team is the last game to be released on both the 3DS and the Wii. The Wii was one of the biggest sellers of Skylanders games. When they brought Trap Team to the Wii, they were basically doing it running on fumes. They could barely make the Wii run Trap Team, and that is very noticeable in the sizable graphical downgrades that are present in the Wii version. Just literally look at any picture of Skylanders Trap Team for the Wii, and you will realize just how poorly those graphics were done on that console. I'm pretty sure that the mobile iPad version of Trap Team was done better than the actual Wii version, and that's kind of insane that an iPad was able to run it better than a Wii. I understand that iPads were newer, but still, it's a little insane. I think this is especially bad considering that the Wii was, again, where most of the sales for Skylanders even was. So releasing the worst version of the game ever made on your best-selling console is going to leave a bad taste in the mouth of consumers. Skylanders Trap Team is the first game to feature a sales decline. Skylanders Trap Team across all consoles sold 4.62 million copies, which is a sizable number. However, it was 1.7 million sales lower than the Swap Force release. So just for comparison, Swap Force sold 6.32 million and Trap Team sold 4.62 million. That's a pretty sizable decline. That was huge. And it was the first game in the Skylanders franchise to actually feature a decline in sales. Skylanders Spyro's Adventure sold well. Giant sold better, Swap Force sold the best, and Swap Force remains the #1 best-selling title in the Skylanders franchise. From there, it would decline every single game that followed. The main reason for the sales decline with Trap Team is actually the competition. 2014 is when all of the other competitors for Skylanders were really starting to get their feet on the ground. Amiibo, Disney Infinity especially is probably the biggest culprit at this point. I think that LEGO Dimensions really didn't start becoming a bigger competitor until 2015, and it really more so cut into the Superchargers sales, I think, than the Trap Team sales. But Infinity is really what started cutting into the sales at this point in the franchise. Skylanders Trap Team is actually a fairly meaty game. It had a good bit of content. It had some memorable levels. But the main reason that Trap Team started the decline for the entire franchise as a whole was how horrible it was for accessibility to general fans. Hardcore collectors like me that bought all of the figures that you see behind me didn't have so much of an issue with Skylanders Trap Team because I was planning on getting all the figures anyway. However, Trap Team really made it difficult for parents to juggle multiple Toys to Life games. With Infinity, you needed the starter pack to really enjoy the game, and as you went, you could buy the new sets, the new play sets, to expand your game. They just sold expansion sets. But with Trap Team, it really showed that the only way to enjoy Skylanders was if you were willing to drop enough money to actually get all of the different pieces of content. Even if you ignored the adventure packs, which normally it was very easy to ignore the adventure packs, you still needed to spend over $300 to truly enjoy Skylanders Trap Team. And for a lot of kids, that was a significant amount of their allowance money. For me, I mean, obviously that was a lot of, it's still a good bit of money now. Like $300 is nothing to shake a stick at. That's how much it costs to buy a Nintendo Switch. But in 2014, when I was a 14-year-old, that was even more money. And if I had tried to juggle Skylanders Trap Team and Disney Infinity and LEGO Dimensions as a casual player, it would have been incredibly difficult for me because I would have had to have spread my money so thin and would not have been able to enjoy Skylanders as a casual fan. And ultimately, that is why I always have called Skylanders Trap Team the franchise killer. It made the game so inaccessible to general fans, despite being one of the better games of the Skylanders franchise. That being said, though, I do think that most people agree that Trap Team has some of the least inspired characters of the entire franchise. It has some really cool characters, don't get me wrong. Wildfire, Crypt King, Shortcut, Gearshift, Enigma. It's got all these cool characters. Don't get me started on Nightlight, one of my favorite characters of all time. But I was discussing this with my friends the other day. It would be incredibly easy for me to point at all of the Trap Masters and say, okay, if we're only going with one Trap Master per element, I could pretty much sit here and go, not this one, not this one, not this one, not this one, incredibly easily. The same thing goes for pretty much the cores. There are a few good cores here. You've got Blades, who wound up being a fan favorite. A lot of people really like Food Fight. Some people like Torch. The point that I'm trying to make here is that it would have been incredibly easy for me to have eliminated half of the Skylanders Trap Team figures and just gotten down to one Trap Master and one core character per element. The decisions that they used to make, to decide who got to be in Skylanders Trap Team was incredibly random and incredibly weird, and I think they could have done with half the figures, and honestly, I think that would have been better for the game overall. There's so many things that could have been done to have made this game much more refined, both in the gameplay and the figure side of things. Ultimately, I think the biggest reason that this game left a sour taste in people's mouth was because of the fact of the accessibility, as I've already said. Essentially, Trap Team is a great game for hardcore collectors, but a horrible game for casual fans. And ultimately, casual fans who only bought, maybe a dozen characters per year are ultimately what made the Skylanders franchise, a good selling point. Most people did not go around and buy all the characters like myself. Most people only bought a few characters every year. And ultimately, this game showed you can't do that and fully enjoy Skylanders. So that is why I think that Trap Team marked the decline of the franchise that would later be made more obvious once we got to Superchargers, which is the game a lot of people point to as the true downfall of the franchise. And while I think that Superchargers did still do things that were wrong, for instance, half the game is a racing game instead of an original Skylanders game, Trap Team is really where the start of the downfall started. Again, I think Trap Team's a great game from a gameplay standpoint. The gameplay was cool. Trapping villains was cool. We've talked very little about the actual gameplay of Trap Team because despite the fact that it's still a good game, it's not the main talking point when you're looking at Trap Team from a critical standpoint. It's the way the collectibles and the figures were handled for Trap Team. When we get to Superchargers, we'll be talking a lot more about the gameplay because the gameplay is more noteworthy in Superchargers. So you'll probably notice a very big difference in the tone of the video once we get to Superchargers, which will be, of course, the topic for next week's Brief History of Skylanders. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I rambled on for quite some time about Trap Team. I could really do that, honestly. Like, if you ever want me to do a live stream and just exclusively talk about Skylanders Trap Team, I would probably totally be down for that. So thank you again so much for watching this video. Stay tuned because next week I should have the Brief History of Skylanders Superchargers up for you guys. Really excited to do that one and get this series, moving along. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Go drop me a follow on both Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to join the Skylanders community as a whole, feel free to join the Discord that is down in the description below. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.